Hello there, welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, and today we're exploring a little-known but highly relevant phenomenon, plants directly absorbing pollution and using it as nutrition. So, now to be clear, we're not talking about nitrogen fixation here. There's no microbes involved, no beans or legumes. We're not talking about taking nitrogen from the air or carbon dioxide from the air. We're talking about the direct uptake of airborne nitrogen oxides, ammonia and sulfur compounds, particularly through the leaves and stomata, and plants using them as nutrients. This is something that is not talked about much in plant physiology, plant nutrition. You won't hear any other brands talking about it because they want you to buy fertilizer and things like this. But air pollution is not just a threat to health, human health, or climate change and the ecosystem in general. It's becoming a surprisingly significant source of plant nutrients, especially in urban and in industrialized areas. And so there's a long history of this because air pollution's been around for nearly 200 years now, since the Industrial Revolution. And so there's lots of examples of where air pollution has been used by plants. So let's unpack how it works, the implications, and what growers need to know about how to manage it intelligently. We've talked about things like ozone before being an air pollutant that is damaging to plants. This is one that is going to be, in most cases, beneficial, but some things to look out for to make sure you didn't take it over the edge. So modern air contains more than nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and 1% argon. Did you know that? Agricultural and industrial emissions contribute to sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, so NO and NO2, which are collectively termed NOx or NOx, from vehicle exhausts and power stations, ammonia from livestock and fertilizer drift, and micronutrient particles from pesticide drift and dust. Things like many of the fungicides used in orchards contain zinc. So if you're growing down in Kent and there's loads of orchards, you might be getting a fair amount of zinc in the air, in the dust. So these compounds can dissolve in leaf moisture on rain. So they can in the dew. They can bind to airborne dust, and many absorb directly through the plant stomata, especially under humid conditions. So how do plants absorb them? Well, the gases like sulfur dioxide and ammonia, when they touch the leaf surface, the sulfur dioxide is oxidized into sulfite and sulfate, and they're what plants can use as a nutrient. The NO and NO2 are converted to nitrates, and we all know that nitrates are what's in fertilizer, and the ammonia dissolves as ammonium. So things like ammonia, the NO and the NO2 combined with the ammonia, that'll convert to something like ammonium nitrate, which is a common fertilizer. So plants absorb and metabolize these just like nutrients from roots and just like a foliar fertilizer. And this is where it gets interesting. Recent estimates suggest that in Europe, up to 25 kilos per hectare of nitrogen is deposited onto farmland annually through air pollution. That's a real and measurable part of the nutrient budget. It's like a big bag of ammonium nitrate being, well, even more than that, because ammonium nitrate is not pure nitrogen. It's like 2 or 3 bags of ammonium nitrate per hectare. That's not an insignificant amount. The impact this added nitrogen and sulfur can skew nutrient ratios. Plants may show luxury nitrogen uptake even without root application. Sulfur inputs from sulfur dioxide and rain can replace or complement sulfur fertilizers. Now, in Europe, the amount of sulfur in the air has actually gone down because of the reduction in coal-fired power stations. And so we're finding in agriculture, they have to put more sulfur into the fertilizers. And I've spoken to a few fertilizer companies in the UK, and they're saying, we really value sulfur and we try and get as much sulfur into the product as possible. So Cali Seaman at Shogun, as we've talked about that in the past, and certainly Utrema. We really value products that contain sulfur because there's less sulfur around, whereas a lot of the old school fertilizers were developed when there was plenty of sulfur coming from the air, so plants weren't showing symptoms of it. Farmers in urban areas must probably factor that in when formulating fertigation, because there's a move now to sort of urban farms and things like this, like in Detroit and places like this where there's abandoned areas of land. And so you can have more sulfur, more nitrogen, and more ozone damage. So that's not a nutrient. If your crops are consistently high in nitrogen despite low applications, the air might be fertilizing them for you. So what's the hidden risk of too much nutrition? Well, a boost of sulfur and nitrogen can help, but if you had too much, sulfur will always burn, and nitrogen can burn, ammonia can burn. You get tip burn, chlorosis. You can disrupt beneficial fungi, including mycorrhiza, sulfur especially. Sulfur turns to sulfuric acid in high doses, and so that will damage fungi particularly. Prolonged exposure will damage your leaves. If you burn sulfur in a greenhouse and you've got plants there, then you'll know that will damage leaves because it'll just be far too acidic. And it might shift to the microbial balance in favour of pathogens. So one study showed that sulfur pollution can suppress beneficial fungi and promote disease-causing types. So that's a lose-lose situation. So are certain plants better at absorbing pollution than others? And certain plants can. They've evolved to actively benefit from air pollution. So Magnolia cobus and Eucalyptus viminalis can derive over 10% of their nitrogen from NOx gases in urban environments. That's interesting because Magnolia are considered quite a primitive tree species, whereas Eucalyptus, that's Antipodean. Not much pollution down in Australia, is there, in the outback? So that opens a fascinating opportunity. Could these species be harnessed? Could scientists study these plants that are particularly good at absorbing pollution, and plant them in urban and roadside gardens to capture nitrogen and thrive and grow even faster? Remember, this is not nitrogen fixation. They're absorbing nitrogen oxides directly from the atmosphere, not atmospheric nitrogen gas, which is not a pollutant. What about dust and micronutrients? In nutrient-poor regions like deserts, airborne dusts become a major nutrient source, carrying phosphorus, potassium, calcium, and magnesium, and trace elements from synthetic fertilizers, industrial activity, and road dust. So factories giving out things they shouldn't into the air, which they do, and have to be caught and prosecuted, things like this. So zinc and copper can enter systems via pesticide use, especially in fruit crops, as I've said. Things like mancozeb contain these micronutrients. Think of Bordeaux mixture and various copper products that are used on vineyards. So every single copper pesticide is banned in the UK now, apart from on grapes. So around vineyards, then they could be used. There's lots of vineyards near me, near Brooksworth in Northamptonshire. And so there could be zinc and copper in the air around there. And then around the world, copper's used on vineyards, unfortunately, because it's a horrible, dangerous, toxic chemical, heavy metal. So, yeah, but we think of like the drift from deserts, it wouldn't affect us here in England, but actually it does. We do get sand from the Sahara drifting in on various weather conditions, and cars get covered in it, things like this. So, and especially in Spain and places like that, and Tenerife, people with lung problems in Tenerife go on a holiday to Tenerife in the winter and can actually make it 10 times worse because of the dust coming in from the Sahara. So it travels a long way, desert dust and its nutrients. So, and then we've got rising CO2 levels, don't just impact climate, they influence root behavior and plant growth. High CO2 levels make plants release more root exudates, and these root exudates are there to help chelate nutrients and acidify the soil and activate microbial communities. So higher CO2 levels you might think don't impact nutrient levels, but they will. In hydroponics, this could influence your biofilms and your substrate chemistry, and your nutrient demand could actually need higher nutrients when you're supplementing with CO2. Often you'll find self-appointed experts on Facebook and things saying that, CO2 levels are rising, so plants will grow faster and yields will be higher. And you're like, it's not all bad, climate change or global warming, which is a very old phrase. But they're absolutely complete effing idiots, aren't they? Because they don't realise that weeds grow faster than crops when elevated CO2 levels. So we'll have to put more herbicide down. It's not a case of climate change improves yield. It just makes everything harder. At the moment, it's 30 degrees C outside, and I'm pretty certain the farmers are not happy that it's 32 degrees Celsius in the UK when they're trying to grow their crops. So anyway, back to what does air pollution mean for hydroponics? Urban hydroponic growers, especially rooftop or greenhouse setups, may experience unexpected nutrient trends, excess nitrogen or sulfur if they're measuring it, foliar uptake of micronutrients, but probably that's going to be positive for the plants, but negative for anyone who's living in those urban environments. And then you might get, if you live near a factory that was releasing ammonia, which it shouldn't do because they should have ammonia scrubbers, whenever they're using ammonia or sulfur near a power station, a coal-fired power station, then or a busy road, industrial site, livestock operation, you might get pH shifts from just too much ammonia or sulfur. So they might reduce the pH. I think that's been a big problem in China, where ammonia is not controlled as much coming from factories, and they've had issues with crops getting too much ammonia, and then massive. I saw a green tech. I saw this massive factory where they grew hydroponic grass for pigs, and imagine a massive pig farm, like those industrial pig farms that look like skyscrapers, they're actually pig farms. Imagine the amount of ammonia coming off them. If you had a hydroponic setup next to them, you might have ammonia issues. So you can check for ammonia, sulfur dioxide and NOx in your environment, but it is quite difficult. You might be able to get some details on pollution levels in your area. In the UK, we have sensors all around major cities to test for pollution levels because there's legal limits that are set, and often these go over. With electric cars, though, it's not a case of them reducing pollution, but they're certainly getting the pollution out of the urban areas, moving towards bicycles and public transport. With less diesel particles and petrol engines in city centres, the pollution will move towards where the power stations are and not into the city streets. So we potentially could have less air pollution and less air nutrients in city centres and urban environments soon. You could adjust your fertilizer inputs, but you're probably not going to know that it's due to air pollution. It's probably just going to be something you get used to, and you know your local systems and you know your nutrient levels. You're not going to say, oh, we've got high air pollution today, I'm not going to put as much nitrogen on. I'm not kidding you that that's going to be any time soon that people are going to do that. As always wash your foliage, remove dust and residues, especially if you live in an environment where you know there are diesel particles and pollution. But anyway, it's always good to do that because you might have spilt some fertilizer solution or some biostimulant on the leaves, and you might have got some bacteria growing on it or on the leaves. And if you eat that, even if it's non-pathogenic, it could still give you an upset stomach. So always wash your foliage, especially plants that you don't cook before you eat, like lettuce, cucumber, strawberries, and always wash things like lettuce because they've got such a high surface area to volume ratio. So when it goes into your stomach, it's harder for your acids to completely sterilize it. That's why when you go on holiday, you should never eat lettuce, especially for the first week, because your body hasn't become accustomed to the local microflora that might be on the lettuce. And if you're going to get poisoned, lettuce is a really common reason for that. They say you should eat cucumbers and tomatoes and things like this if you want fresh food, but there's one issue with that, and that is those fruits are cut before you eat them. And so that knife has to be clean, otherwise it's just spreading germs across. So your best bet is a whole tomato or a whole cucumber or something like that, a snap cucumber. They're probably the least way to get food poisoning or pollution when you're abroad. That's off topic a bit there, really. Making sure how to not get food poisoning when you're abroad is pretty off topic for an episode. You could potentially use intake filters to prevent pollution coming into your grow room, but they would have to be very, very fine mesh, and that's only going to exclude the dust. You'd have to have a type B filter to remove ammonia and sulfur dioxide and NOx. Carbon filter. You could have a carbon filter on your inlet. That would help if you had a big issue. If you were right next to a pig farm or a chicken farm, then you could do that. The village I'm in's got a big pig farm, and that sometimes I wake up to the smell of pig manure. It's lovely, isn't it? It smells of the countryside, industrial levels of pig production. Maybe I should have a carbon filter on my inlet into my house. And so, I wouldn't avoid applying nitrogen sulfur because you're in an urban environment. I would still think that you better always to apply a bit more sulfur and nitrogen, certainly sulfur, than you're going to need, because deficiencies will really limit your crop and will be the first thing that come across. So the air your plants breathe could be feeding them or stressing them. By understanding how nitrogen, sulfur and dust interact with plant nutrients, you could potentially tune your system or be more precise, or certainly know when issues could arise in certain situations where issues could be caused. If you go to see a grow and it's near to a very busy road, or it's near to a chicken farm or a factory, then you could say, perhaps it's the air pollution coming in from there that is causing either a bump in yield or a stress condition. Maybe you've got burning on the tips of your leaves or something like that. So just a thought. It's not a massive issue. I'm not saying this is the number one issue in hydroponics, or it's something you should be lying up awake at night thinking about, but it's just interesting, isn't it? The fact that your plants could absorb significant amounts of nutrition. Like, imagine those 3 bags of fertilizer, 25 kilo bags, or my body weight, I wish, in nitrogen being applied as fertilizer for every hectare. That's a lot of nitrogen. Okay, that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. Until tomorrow, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.